Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.
Well, hello and welcome to Engage for Success Radio with me, Jo Moffat. Engage for Success is a not-for-profit movement and we are the UK's leading voice on the topic of employee engagement. We're raising awareness and running events online and around the country. We're developing research, publishing case studies, and shining a light on great practice, especially through these weekly radio shows, which are now also streaming live on YouTube. Simply search Engage for Success Radio podcast. Or you can find the full archive at engageforsuccess.org, where you can learn more about us and sign up for our weekly newsletter. I'm one of 3 regular hosts for Engage for Success Radio, and as with everyone who supports the movement, we are all volunteers with day jobs. I founded and led Woodreed, which was a consultancy leveraging the creative and insight-led approach of the advertising world to engage employees inside organisations. And having sold Woodreed to 7Cs, the culture consultancy, I now work as a senior consultant supporting their clients to create workplace cultures that make workplaces work for employees as well as shareholders and stakeholders. Now, today is, believe it or not, radio show number 631. And the subject that we're going to be exploring today is one very close to my heart. We're going to be looking at solving what's known as the last mile culture change challenge and doing that with AI. So obviously AI on everyone's lips at the moment. But this idea, this concept of the last mile challenge when it comes to culture change, I think is a very intriguing one, and one I think that a lot of our listeners will probably consciously or unconsciously realise that they struggle with. So to help us explore that topic, I'm very pleased to welcome today's guest, Elie Rashbass. Elie is CEO and co-founder of ScultureAI. He began his career in mergers and acquisitions and investment roles. I'm going to ask him in a moment to tell us a little bit about his background. But Elie now leads an AI-powered platform that helps organisations embed culture through real-time, personalised behavioural nudges that help to align employee behaviour with company values. He will be talking a little bit more about that with us in a moment. But it is this last mile, the challenge of converting learning into action, what you hear in the seminar room, what you learn in the workshop, into that sort of day-to-day scenario that can so often be the problem. We talk about it at Engage for Success when we talk about the 4 enablers, don't we? We talk about the say, do gap. We talk about organisational integrity being not simply words on a wall, words on a poster, words on a lanyard around your neck, but one where the behaviours are lived on a day-to-day basis by everybody in the organisation, from the newest recruit to the most senior leader. So today we're going to look at how an AI tool can make that culture change that we all aim for an organisational reality, and how that can really transform the future of what we know to be learning, leadership and performance. So Elie, that's a build up for you, isn't it?
No, a perfect introduction to the topic, and yeah, thanks a lot, Jo, for inviting me on the show. And
really happy to be here. It's great to have you here. And we first met, didn't we, back in the autumn last year, 2025, when I was hosting one of our Engage for Success Partners Business Culture Connected's conference in London, and you were one of the speakers there. I was fascinated by what you had to say, and buttonholed you afterwards and said you must come on the radio show. So here you are. We have quite a long lead time to get guests on this show. So I'm really pleased to have you here. But before we go into today's topic, can we just start a little bit about you, Elie? Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to set up ScultureAI, and what it is that makes this topic so important to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So as you say, I've been working, set up ScultureAI around 3 years ago. Throughout that time, been working at the intersection of AI and behavioral change, which is really fascinating because it really gets to the heart of how humans and technology come together. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a bit more during the conversation. I mean, looking back to the earlier stages of my career, as you mentioned, I worked in different parts of the investment world, in banks, private equity firms, etc. And those are, really, I think, great places in many ways to learn about culture, because of how strong the cultures are in these places, both the things that the banks do really well, and also the areas of culture where can be more of a struggle. And having done a master's in business psychology, always having had a keen interest in the area, I was fascinated by this idea of how do you bring multiple people together, to achieve something kind of greater than the sum of their individual parts. And a lot of that is done through the culture of the organization, which we'll come to. And
Mhm.
as technology was changing and kind of is continuing to change so quickly, around 3 or 4 years ago, together with a group of other founders, we had this idea to use AI to help everybody be the best version of themselves. So much of the talk about AI was, how do we replace people? How do we take processes we're already doing and either automate them or make them more efficient? But actually, there's such a big opportunity to, how do you use AI to help people do things that they couldn't even do before? How do you help organizations solve problems that they couldn't solve before? And culture is a really interesting application of that. And I was incredibly excited about the opportunity to use technology to solve some of these problems, both from my academic background, from my own kind of personal interests, and from what the technology now allows us to do. So I joined forces with a group of three other founders with similar
Mhm.
beliefs and passions, to try and be at the forefront of helping companies to drive behavior change at scale, and giving everybody almost superpowers as they work, but very much inspired by the company's values and behaviors.
Yeah, lovely. Elie, thank you for that.
Sure.
So I have a saying which I used in my opening remarks. So I like to define. Everyone has their own definition of culture, and there's as many definitions of culture, organisational culture, particularly, as we've all had hot dinners sometimes, I feel. But I like to define culture as culture is what makes workplaces work for shareholders, stakeholders, and employees. That's mine. What's yours? How do you define it?
Well, I really like that one, as well. One that I like to use, I like to talk about culture as the soul of the company, because
Mhm.
it's often quite difficult to describe. It's made up of both the intangible and the tangible, but it's really the way things are done here, the way
Yes.
how we operate, but both on a good day and also on a bad day. Culture isn't just, of course, how people show up when things are going well, but also when not going so well. So I completely agree, Joe, with what you're saying. It's the shareholders, it's the employees, it's the leadership. But culture is one of those few things that, when it's right, everybody wins, and when it's not, everybody loses. It's not zero sum, in that way. So yeah, completely agree with you about the power of culture to influence all stakeholders involved in such a material way.
And why do you think it is so important? And a little bit of a supplementary to that, if it is so important, and certainly conversations over recent years suggest that we all understand that, do you think that importance is being threatened at the moment? Is there a sense that this is a bit fluffy and pink and not really kind of the stuff that really matters?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And as you say, I think there's increasing awareness of how important culture is, and how, the usual words, kind of non-fluffy, it is. And it's interesting, on more and more kind of earnings calls now, you hear CEOs talking about the culture, kind of recognizing that it's the biggest driver of not just kind of employee well-being, employee engagement, but of financial performance as well. And of course, that's not surprising when you think about, what is it that drives the results of the company. It's the
Mm.
people that are working in it. But I think it's very interesting. I mean, there are lots of famous quotes, that talk about culture eats strategy for breakfast, and many
Yes.
others many others as well. More recent ones also. We're bringing out this idea that it doesn't matter what your strategy is if you don't have the culture to underpin that. You're not going to achieve it. So, for example, you can put all types of strategies in place to try and innovate, but if ultimately there's a culture where people are scared to try things and make mistakes, of course there's not going to be any innovation. So culture is super important at all levels. I mean, on the employee side, so much research, particularly on the engagement space, and of course you'll be the expert in this, but showing that how much more employees are likely to be engaged, 4 or 5 times as likely when the culture is strong. Estimates say 60-70% less likely to burn out, 50% less likely to look for other jobs. And really we could fill the whole kind of conversation with this link between culture and engagement, and likewise between engagement and financial performance, which of course follows straight through from the culture point. So really in all ways, culture is driving really everything that matters in the company. And you mentioned, is there a fear perhaps that people are looking at it as not that important, or a bit fluffy? I think from everything we're seeing, I think there's an increased awareness actually that you have to get culture right. But of course, having that kind of determination or that desire to make the culture what it needs to be doesn't on its own solve the problem.
No, the intentions are good, but we don't always see it delivered, do we? And I think that's right, Elie. So, okay, this is a topic we've all been talking about for a goodly time, as it's big money, it's big business. Organizations spend an awful lot of time thinking about it and trying to address it. And in many cases, not always, but many cases, they're going to be spending money, whether it be on learning and development, training for their people, management consultants to come in and sort them out, whatever it may be. It's not just time, but it's also can often be money. So why do you think people find, or organizations find, it so hard to get culture right? What's the challenge?
Yeah, it's such a big challenge for organizations, and it extends beyond just kind of culture change. It's really transformations in general. McKinsey, who do a lot of research in this space, are well known. I think for a decade or so, maybe longer, have kind of established this kind of rule of thumb that 70% of transformations kind of fail to achieve their goals on a sustained basis. And of course, culture change is no different from that. And I think a core reason why is that companies do an amazing job at, if we think about culture specifically, of diagnosing what their current culture is, often working, as you say, with kind of great consultants to do that. Also do a great job being more and more scientific about, well, what do we need our culture to be in order to succeed? But actually moving from the culture you have to the culture you need, of what's often known as the last mile, is easier said than done, because really 90%, maybe more, of companies' efforts go into, as I say, diagnosing the current, determining what the next one should be, and then setting up lots of workshops and learning initiatives to kind of make people aware of what they want the culture to be. But of course, that doesn't make it the culture just because you've told people that. Whereas in fact, where culture is actually happening, which is in the millions of interactions, decisions, behaviors in particular, that are going on at massive scale across all the front lines on an ongoing basis, to actually scale and sustain that change is incredibly difficult, especially when most of those interactions are digital now. How do you actually help colleagues when they're in those situations to be aware that this is one of these moments to be a bit more determined, a bit more ambitious, a bit more customer focused, a bit more innovative, whatever it is that the company's trying to drive? How do you help people recognize those moments? You mentioned before this kind of saying doing gap, and you can do lots of workshops, and that's of course an important first step. But how do people know that this is one of these opportunities to apply what I learned in the workshop? Even if you do know it's one of those opportunities, how do you then bring it to life? So I think there's lots of research that shows that culture falls because the front line aren't there's no way to sustain it on the front line. You can work with leaders, maybe kind of leader -1 level, with some of the managers, but how do you work with the front line to help them to live and breathe these values in the everyday, even when they want to? And that's a challenge that, until technology came along, there was never really a way to interact with people in their flow of work, on the front line at scale and on a sustained basis.
So actually, talking about the last mile, listening to what you're saying there, talking about the last mile, it almost sounds like actually the defining, it's almost like the defining of the culture and the scoping out what we want it to look like, and the, that we do the strategizing and the workshops. That's almost like that's the first mile, and actually there's a million miles after that we're just not getting right.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a very good analogy which I sometimes use. I heard, I can't remember who I got it from, but I think it's worth repeating, which is that, if you imagine the Wimbledon tennis tournament, if they put a sign up outside saying that they want the weather to be, hot and dry, of course that doesn't make it hot and dry. It's an important first step to recognize that that's what you want the weather to be. But of course, just putting the signs up, doesn't do it. And even for some of the most sophisticated companies, the most high-tech companies, that exist globally, when it comes to the reinforcement, the kind of activation, the embedding of cultural values, it is often posters or screensavers and kind of static nudges, because what more can you do than that kind of? And before technology came along, and that's kind of where we felt actually there is an opportunity with AI. But it's not that companies don't care, but it's actually, well, what can they do beyond that? So yeah, I completely agree with you. Getting better and better at working out the starting point, more and more science there, more and more data, getting better at determining, well, what do we need to do to be different? What do we need to do to stand out from the competition? What is it that makes us special? But actually to reinforce that, to sustain it in real work decisions, interactions, which of course is what either makes or breaks whether that's the reality or not. There's never been a way to do it, because that layer of the organization has just been invisible as things are happening in real time.
So you talked about tech until tech came along, till tech and AI, particularly AI, came along, and I'd love to hear then how you see that happening. What can be done. I think you made the point that either employees won't necessarily know there's an opportunity. They may be willing and able, or willing anyway, but they may not necessarily know. This is the sort of circumstance, the sort of situation where what we learned at that workshop last week could be applied here. They may not necessarily be able to join those two things up. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? I may be preempting a little bit. So let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit then how AI and technology can help to solve this problem of making it happen on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, of course. So I think the first point to note is that, and this won't be a surprise to anyone, but it's accelerated through COVID, but really was the case anyways, is that everybody is now working digitally. Pretty much. There's obviously lots of working from home, but really so many communications, so many decisions, so many interactions are happening over digital workflows or have some type of digital footprint. And the reason why that's interesting is because it means if you had a way to, and by you I kind of mean the company or the company's technology, to be present in those communications, interactions, behaviors, decisions, you can start to think about whether you can observe in real time what's going on. And I don't mean observe in kind of a spying or monitoring or kind of compliance sense, but I mean in the sense of, agents working alongside humans. Often the agents that you kind of hear about now are there to kind of do tasks for the employee or to speed things up. But there's also, the point there is that agents are there in the workflow. And imagine that it's not really imagine, this is the reality now. They're observing, they're seeing what's happening, and if they're able to kind of compare what's going on, what are the behaviors, decisions, attitudes which the AI is able to see going on in real time in these interactions by these people, by these teams, and compare those against the set of target behaviors, target values. And of course those will be different for different people in the organization. They'll be different depending on the situation, different teams, different levels, etc. But the amazing thing, of course, is that AI can be incredibly kind of context specific. So, by kind of training these agents, training these AI models what the behaviors are which drive success at this company, which make up the culture, and in real time kind of looking as people are writing emails, Teams messages, Slack messages, other types of communications, but not there to kind of help them say what they're saying in different words. There's lots of great tools out there that help you kind of convey your message in the best words, but actually the opportunity to say, well, is this not what you're saying, but what are you doing? Often people's communications are a window into their mindsets, behaviors, decisions. What about this new idea that's come up? Not how do you say no in the best words, but should we be saying no to this, or should we be trying to be a bit more curious about new ideas, and catching those opportunities as they're happening and sending people very, but number one, private, but also very personalized contextual nudges at the exact moment that could cause them just to stop for a second and think, maybe I can actually explore this idea a bit further before we shut it down, even if there are some constraints. So the idea of catching opportunities and using them as opportunities to help people to think differently about things that perhaps otherwise they naturally would have missed an opportunity on doesn't just impact that interaction, but also has the opportunity to change the way their brain thinks. And that, I think, is the real opportunity, that even if you only catch one thing a day, you're actually changing the way that their brain thinks. If we continue that example, when a new idea comes up, but there are obstacles, normally they would see obstacles and say, well, what can I do? But now you're getting their brain to think differently in the exact moment when a real situation is going on. And that's one of the big differences versus classroom learning. So so I suppose to answer the question very, very directly, technology allows us to be in the flow of work, to be seeing work as it happens in real time, to be able to intervene and give somebody just a nudge at the right moment. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? That not only has the chance to change what they're doing in that situation, and very much giving these nudges inspired by that company's specific values and behaviors, so different for every company. And of course, AI can be personalized at the company level and the individual level, and helping to shape these kind of interactions one by one. And if you capture one a day per person in a company with 1,000 people, that's 5,000 a week, 20,000 a month, hundreds of thousands a year, but just a few seconds each day for somebody to reflect on whether there's something better they could do in that situation.
So almost that's a sort of aligning what you're talking about there to the sort of theory of marginal gains, in a way. If we get 5,000 people to change one little thing about what they do, those have a cumulative impact.
Yes, I think marginal gains is one aspect, but I think marginal gains often, is used when the marginal gain is kind of isolated. I think what's very interesting here is other theories which kind of combine with that. So theories like neuroplasticity, which is, when you engage the brain in kind of an experiential type of learning, it actually rewires the brain in a different way than in a classroom when it's quite abstract. So it's marginal in the sense that it's one thing they did today, but actually the ability for that to kind of carry through. So, companies that use Sculpture to try and do this, some of the things we hear from the users is that actually even when the tool doesn't pop up, it's got them to think differently because we've had an impact on the way their brain thinks. That, of course, is
I
part
get
of
you.
and that's what
So
nudge therapy is about.
Interesting. So neuroplasticity was what you said, yeah?
Exactly, the ability for the brain to kind of rewire itself. Exactly.
Fascinating. Okay. So this is, I mean, if we were to be really clunky about this and sort of old school, I could be sitting here at my computer about to respond to somebody's email, and I might think, oh yes, oh yeah, we did this stuff, didn't we, on values and behaviors? Oh, what should I do? I know, I'll ask ChatGPT or I'll ask Copilot and see what they say I should do. Kind of fairly clunky, fairly need to remind myself to do it, fairly lengthy, I'm guessing, and fairly generic, potentially. Are you saying that tech has now evolved such that we can be much more granular and much more in my almost in my head, if you like, rather than me having to actively do something actually comes and says, hang on a minute, Joe, have you thought about XYZ? Is that what you're talking about, Elie?
So that there is definitely an element of the kind of seamlessness of how it integrates and how it's proactive rather than you needing to go. But there's another quite big difference between, what we're trying to do at Sculpture and what some of these other tools mention, and they're all excellent tools that you're mentioning, of course, which is that a lot of those are there where you say, I'm trying to give this message. What's the best way for me to give this message? People will often use Copilot, people use ChatGPT to get it to kind of rewrite its message in the best possible words, but really a linguistic exercise that the AI is helping them do. What
Right.
we're actually trying to say is more of a behavioral exercise, which is this what you want to be doing in the first place? So, to maybe just give a 30-second example,
Mm.
we've seen, we obviously run thousands of test cases through and one example would be, where somebody's writing to say that that they've missed a deadline. So when you put these things through ChatGPT or Copilot, it might, help you to, I suppose, explain why you've missed the deadline, or when you're going to be able to do it, by kind of add that further information, improve your email. But what we've seen our tools say is things like, well, how do you make sure you don't miss the deadline next time? It's not actually about what you write in this email per se. It's more that the email is a window into the situation that you're in, and trying to help
Okay.
you to be more determined, more kind of proactive, to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. So we see that people who use, behavioral the kind of agents like Sculpture is much more not about how do I write this email better, but about how do I be a more ambitious, innovative, determined person, whatever the behaviors are that the company is trying to drive. So on the one hand, it's fully integrated. It's like a seamlessness, efficiency point of how you use it, but it's also about, it's trying to help you be kind of a super version of you, rather than to write what you were anyways going to write in better words, if that makes sense.
Okay, and so aligning it very specifically to an organization's culture and target behaviors. And
Yes.
I'm imagining by embedding a tool like this, and I other tools are available, I have to add, I'm sure, but it might be nuanced, or would be nuanced in an ideal world. You would nuance that to reflect whether I'm a manager or a team leader or a shift supervisor or a senior exec.
Yes, so it's weird. I mean, of course, it starts at the company, in the sense that the company, let's say they have a value of accountability, will often define that differently for a manager or an individual contributor or a senior leader. Of course, being accountable, having ownership means something different depending on if you're on the graduate scheme or you're an experienced manager. So companies will often define this themselves. What do we mean by accountability at this level, that level, and we will then capture that in the model. So we're a software company. We don't tell companies what those behaviors should be, but we capture those behaviors in a very nuanced way for them, and make sure that the models know when they're looking at a manager or an individual contributor or a senior leader, and absolutely capturing that granularity, as you described, Joe, is critical.
Do employees not feel a little bit kind of big brother about this, though? I mean, is there a sense of, oh goodness me, there's a spy, and whether it be big brother's watching you, or there's a spy in the cab, or all of these sorts of things, we all start to get a little bit twitchy about this sort of thing, don't we?
Yeah, and I think rightfully so, that people should be mindful of companies, of their company not spying on them. And that's why for us, and I think, for, as you say, for many of the companies that are kind of operating in this kind of agents that are working alongside human space, it's very much about, it's not there to check on the employee or to spy, but it's about being there to help them. And I think that the world is changing, in the sense people are used to working with agents now, or people should be or will be soon. Really, everybody's going to be managing agents at some point very soon, if they aren't already. And so I think it's all about how the company, how we as a provider convey and this message to users, that this is there for them. Of course, there are very strict kind of rules in place, such as we don't share any individual data with companies. Everything's anonymized and anonymized and aggregated, kind of a bit like a survey would be. So they're kind of the rules that obviously are very important. But it's also, this is not about we are forcing you to adopt the values. This is, how do we help you be the best version of yourself, as inspired by the company's values and behaviors? How do we help you be more innovative, and completely privately? So it's all about how the message is conveyed, but always making sure that the user's privacy is always completely protected. So kind of like you would with an employee survey, for example, but giving employees the opportunity to have support in real time. And so, yeah, it's a core part of how we onboard users, how companies communicate this tool and other tools that do similar things to users, or this is how they should do it anyways. I think, in my opinion, is that this is there for them. It's not there for the company's benefit, even though, as you said, when culture goes right, everybody wins, including the company.
I think it's interesting. I mean, this prompts so much of a discussion around the whole issue of trust, doesn't it? And we know how important that is in organizational culture. We know how important it is in terms of leadership behaviors, manager behaviors. there's a big issue. I mean, forget this particular, the particular applications we're talking about specifically here, but the broader debates around AI and the use of AI in the workplace and the impact, how organisations share with their people their plans around the introduction of AI and what this means, and whether people can trust what they're being told, is very, very important. It seems to me that's probably one of the biggest things we have a responsibility to get right with all of these tools, whatever they are. What do you think about that, Elie?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Joe. The trust is more important than it's ever been. There's a lot of fear in general in kind of the employee community or population at the moment. You know, is AI gonna take over my job? What does it mean? There's often a certain reluctance even to engage with it just because of that general fear, and that trust is absolutely critical, as you say. So you know, we as I say, we work very hard to make sure that users understand, you know, what the tool does do, what it doesn't do, what it can see, what it can't see, what it does do with their data, what it doesn't do with their data, what it stores, what it does. Also, complete transparency at all times is absolutely critical in order to maintain that trust. So that has to be front and center of everything that companies are doing on the AI side if they want to get kind of buy-in and adoption. You know, there's very low adoption still of AI kind of usage in a lot of companies, and I'm sure a lot of that comes down to trust. And so it's definitely an area that is worth companies, you know, thinking very strongly about, you know, making sure they get that right.
Okay, this is going to run and run clearly, and we're right out of time. So, Elie, Rashbass, thank you very much for joining us from ScultureAI to talk about pushing that last mile, though I really think it's probably a lot more than 1 mile, as I said. So it's been great having you with us. Maybe we can have you back again, because I don't think AI is going anywhere, and we can talk perhaps more broadly about applications. But it's been great hearing from you. Thank you. Some interesting concepts to think about there. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to Engage for Success Radio. Don't forget, you can download or stream any of the great shows from our archive at any time. And if you want to get involved in the movement, you can also do that by getting in touch with us at engageforsuccess.org. So thank you very much for listening. Elie Rashbass, thank you for joining us as a guest, and goodbye.
Goodbye, thank you.
Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.